You wake up one morning and tell yourself, today will be different. You'll eat clean, stay focused, finally finish that project. But by 10 p.m., you're on your third episode of a show you don't even like. Your phone's at 3% after hours of scrolling, and that list you made in the morning, forgotten. And still, you say, tomorrow. Tomorrow I'll fix it. But what if I told you this isn't laziness? It's not just procrastination. It's something far deeper, something hidden inside you that's actively working against your best intentions. Freud believed that the self is not one unified, rational whole. Instead, he saw us as battlegrounds, and most of the fighting happens where we can't see it, beneath the surface of consciousness. We think we're in control of our lives. We believe we're rational actors making clear decisions. But Freud shattered that illusion. According to him, your conscious mind, the you think you are, is just a tiny island floating on a vast ocean of unconscious urges, memories, fears, and drives. He compared it to an iceberg. What's visible is only a fraction of what lies beneath. And sometimes, what lies beneath wants to destroy you. This idea was radical. In a time when most thinkers were celebrating reason and progress, Freud said, no, there's a darker force at work. A part of us that isn't just irrational, but bent on our own undoing. He called it the unconscious, but later, he found something even darker lurking inside it. A silent force he called the death drive. Most people don't know this side of Freud. They think of him as the guy who talked about dreams and childhood trauma. But near the end of his life, Freud began to focus on something far more disturbing. The idea that humans aren't just driven to seek pleasure, we are also drawn, mysteriously, obsessively, fatally, toward our own destruction. But why? Why would we, in the full possession of our intelligence and awareness, act in ways that sabotage our careers, our relationships, our health, even our lives? Why do people stay in toxic relationships? Why do addicts relapse after years of sobriety? Why do some of us feel more at home in failure than in success? Freud's answer wasn't comforting, but it might be the most important idea he ever uncovered. And to understand it, we have to go deeper, into the structure of your mind itself. To understand why you might secretly want to destroy yourself, Freud said, we need to understand what the mind really is, not in the way you've been told, not in terms of intelligence, memory, or mindset, but in terms of its conflicting forces. Because to Freud, your mind is not a peaceful unity. It's a war zone. He broke the psyche into three parts: id, ego, and superego. And here's where it gets disturbing. They don't agree with each other. In fact, they're in constant tension. Let's start with the ID. The id is pure impulse. It wants what it wants right now. Sex, food, dominance, escape. This is the pleasure principle at its rawest. The id doesn't care about consequences. It's not evil, but it's completely immoral. It just wants release. Then there's the superego, the voice of rules, morality, guilt, and societal pressure. This is the part of you that says, you shouldn't think that. You shouldn't want that. You should be better than this. It's shaped by your upbringing, your culture, even your religion. But it can be harsh, brutally so. And in between those two forces is your ego, the part trying to mediate between them and reality. It's the negotiator, the strategist. It's trying to keep the ID's raw desires from exploding, while also trying not to get crushed under the superego's constant judgment. Imagine a courtroom where the id is screaming for chaos, the superego is demanding perfection, and the ego is just trying to get through the day without breaking down. That's your inner life, according to Freud. Now, why does this matter? Because the ego often fails. The ID's demands don't go away just because we repress them. Repression, Freud argued, doesn't delete anything. It just buries it in the unconscious. But buried things still act. They leak out in dreams, slips of the tongue, accidental mistakes, and self-destructive behavior. When you forget that important deadline, when you keep choosing partners who hurt you, when you sabotage your own opportunities, Freud would say, that's not just random, that's the unconscious expressing itself. And it's not just the id acting out. The superego can be just as destructive. When its judgment becomes overwhelming, it doesn't guide you toward moral improvement. It crushes you under shame. It convinces you that you're not enough, that you don't deserve success, love, or happiness. So, you obey your inner critic. You shrink. You fail on purpose. And here's the twist. Sometimes your ego, tired, fractured, defeated, lets it happen. Because it's easier than fighting the war inside you. This is the stage Freud set. A fractured psyche, pulled in 3 directions, repressing urges it can't control, and leaking chaos into the surface of your life. But what if destruction isn't just a leak? What if it's a drive in its own right? What if, deep down, part of you actually wants to fall apart? Freud thought exactly that. And in the next part, we meet his most controversial idea, the death drive. For most of his career, Freud believed human beings were driven by what he called the pleasure principle. That is, we're motivated by the desire to seek pleasure and avoid pain. The id, that primal part of our psyche, constantly pushes us toward gratification, food, sex, comfort, safety. But then Freud noticed something strange. Not everyone pursues pleasure. In fact, many people seem to be caught in patterns of behavior that brought only suffering. Soldiers who'd been through trauma kept reliving their experiences in dreams. Patients sabotaged their own progress in therapy. People made the same self-destructive choices again and again, not despite the pain, but seemingly because of it. It didn't add up. Why would a person continue returning to something that only harms them? This is when Freud introduced a theory so disturbing, even many of his followers rejected it. He called it the death drive, or in German, Todestrieb. According to Freud, there is something inside us, just as fundamental as the drive for pleasure, that is drawn to destruction, chaos, even death itself. It is a pull not toward life, but toward unbeing, toward the absolute quiet of non-existence. He contrasted it with the life drive, or eros, the drive to survive, connect, create, and reproduce. But alongside eros, Freud insisted, runs Thanatos, the dark twin, the one that whispers, burn it all down. This doesn't mean people consciously want to die. The death drive is unconscious, hidden in the very structure of your psyche. But it manifests in repetition, in sabotage, in self-harm, in the strange comfort we find in failure, humiliation, and despair. You might think, that's absurd, no one wants to suffer. But think about how people behave. We repeat toxic patterns. We say we want love, but push good people away. We get close to success, then lose focus. We binge on things that numb us, and afterward, we feel a strange relief, like the world finally matches the self-loathing we carry inside. Freud believed this was more than weakness. It was a deep psychic current pulling us toward dissolution. He saw it even in civilization, in the rise of violence, war, and the destruction of progress. He believed that society itself was a fragile mask trying to hold back this deeper force within all of us. And for the first time in his career, Freud admitted something terrifying. The enemy isn't just outside us, it's inside. This was not a metaphor. Freud saw the death drive as a real force, biological, psychological, existential. And it explained what the pleasure principle could not. Why people destroy what they love. Why they run toward danger. Why, in the quiet of their minds, they long for silence, stillness, and self-erasure. But he also believed this drive doesn't act alone. It's shaped, intensified, by society itself. Freud didn't believe the death drive existed in a vacuum. He believed that civilization itself, the society you live in, strengthens it. At first glance, this might sound counterintuitive. Isn't society built to protect us from destruction? Doesn't it give us law, order, stability, meaning? Freud's answer was yes. And that's the problem. In his book, Civilization and Its Discontents, 1930, he argued that human beings pay a psychological price for living in society, and that price is repression. To maintain civilization, your basic instincts, especially sexual and aggressive ones, must be suppressed. You can't act on them openly. You can't fight whoever angers you. You can't satisfy your desires whenever they arise. You must be good, obey the rules, smile, wait. And so, your desires are pushed underground, into the unconscious. But they don't disappear, they fester. Your anger turns inward. Your hunger becomes guilt. Your sadness becomes numbness. And soon, you're not just repressing instinct, you're repressing yourself. Freud believed this inner repression is what fuels neurosis, the anxiety, guilt, and depression that plague modern life. Society demands self-control, but offers no healthy outlet for what you've buried. The result? You start to collapse in on yourself. Here's the disturbing twist. Freud argued that civilization doesn't just accidentally cause suffering. It needs you to suffer in order to survive. Think about it. A society filled with purely self-expressed individuals, people acting on their desires without restraint, would be chaos. So instead, you're trained to conform, to control yourself. And the better you are at suppressing your instincts, the more civilized you're called. But this success comes at a cost, inner war. You begin to feel torn between who you are and who you're expected to be. You live behind masks, smiling while screaming inside. You play roles, the obedient worker, the polite partner, the productive adult, all while ignoring the voice within that's begging to be free or to be destroyed. The result is what Freud called melancholia, a self-directed aggression that you can't explain. You become your own jailer and executioner. You criticize yourself constantly. You sabotage your joy. You start to believe that you deserve your suffering, and the worst part? Society rewards you for it. It calls you disciplined, responsible, mature. But underneath, your unconscious knows what's really happening. You're slowly erasing yourself with a smile. Freud believed that unless we confront this internalized repression, we'll keep feeding the death drive, not just personally, but collectively, through burnout, war, addiction, collapse. But how do you confront something buried so deep it speaks in dreams and silence? That's what Freud tried to answer, through a radical new method, psychoanalysis. If the death drive is buried in the unconscious, if your own psyche has turned against you, then how do you escape it? Freud's answer wasn't motivational quotes or affirmations. It wasn't about positive thinking. In fact, he believed most forms of self-help were just new ways of avoiding the truth. To Freud, the only path to healing was through confrontation, going directly into the chaos you've spent your life avoiding. This was the essence of psychoanalysis, a deep, often painful journey into the unconscious, a method of listening not just to what people say, but to what slips out, in their dreams, jokes, anxieties, and contradictions. Psychoanalysis begins with a simple but terrifying idea. You are not who you think you are. The real you, the unfiltered, repressed, instinctual you, is hidden. And to find it, you must let go of control. Freud called this process free association, saying whatever comes to mind without censorship, no matter how irrational, dark, or taboo it may seem. Because the unconscious isn't logical. It speaks in symbols, slips, and symptoms. When you forget a name or make a mistake, Freud didn't see that as random. He believed your unconscious was sending a message, one you didn't want to hear. For example, if you keep ending up in the same toxic relationship pattern, it's not just bad luck. It's your unconscious repeating a script, perhaps trying to master an old trauma, or perhaps punishing yourself, feeding the very pain you're trying to escape. Freud believed that only by making the unconscious conscious could you begin to break these cycles. But here's the catch. Most people don't want to know the truth. The truth is destabilizing. It threatens the ego's sense of order. It challenges the comforting narrative that you're a good person making rational choices. It forces you to ask, why did I really do that? And often, the answer is ugly. But Freud would argue, that's the point. You must see the ugliest parts of yourself. The parts that want destruction, pain, silence, before you can gain any power over them. Otherwise, they'll keep controlling you from the shadows. This is why Freud believed psychoanalysis wasn't just therapy. It was a kind of moral awakening, a process of facing the inner split between who you are and who you pretend to be. And it's hard. Freud once said, being entirely honest with oneself is a good exercise. But most people never attempt it, because honesty means looking into the abyss. It means discovering that part of you doesn't want to succeed. That part of you likes the suffering. That part of you believes you deserve to be ruined. Not because it's true, but because that belief feels familiar, safe, known. The death drive thrives in that familiarity, and unless it's seen, it will grow. Freud never promised salvation. He didn't offer enlightenment, peace, or self-fulfillment. What he offered was something more honest and far more difficult. Understanding. He believed that once you truly see the unconscious forces driving your behavior, including the death drive, you can begin to live with them instead of being ruled by them. But you'll never be rid of them. That's the painful truth most people can't accept. There is no final victory over your inner chaos, no perfect version of you that's free of self-doubt, fear, or the desire for destruction. The death drive isn't a glitch in the system, it is the system, an inseparable part of what makes you human. So, what do you do with it? You stop pretending. You stop imagining that healing means being happy all the time, or that a successful life is one where you never feel the pull of despair. Instead, you begin a practice of conscious integration, the very thing Freud hoped psychoanalysis could lead to. That doesn't mean giving in to the death drive, it means becoming aware of it. When you notice yourself sabotaging a relationship, you pause. You ask, what am I trying to destroy? And why? When you feel the numbness creeping in, the self-loathing voice whispering, you're not enough, you don't push it down. You investigate it. You trace it back to its source, to the part of you that still believes suffering is safer than change. And slowly, you reclaim your agency. You stop being a puppet of the unconscious. Freud wasn't trying to turn people into saints. He was trying to wake them up, to show them that the greatest battle of your life isn't against the world, it's against yourself. But here's what's often misunderstood. Freud didn't think the death drive was purely negative. He saw in it a kind of dark potential. Yes, it wants to undo, to dissolve, to return to nothing. But in doing so, it also clears the path. Creation often follows destruction. Rebirth follows collapse. The urge to destroy yourself might not mean you truly want to die, but that something within you needs to end. An identity, a mask, a lie, and the only way the unconscious knows how to kill it is to make you suffer. But if you can recognize the signal underneath the self-sabotage, you can begin to transform it, not escape it, transform it. This is where modern thinkers like Carl Jung picked up Freud's torch, encouraging us to integrate our shadow, the darker self, rather than deny it. But it was Freud who first saw clearly that your suffering isn't random, it's coded, it's telling you something. Maybe that's the real lesson behind Freud's most disturbing theory. You don't want to destroy yourself. You want to destroy the version of you that was built to survive pain. The one who adapted by staying small, by hiding, by being silent. The one who learned that misery was safer than expression, and that numbness was better than failure. So, the next time you feel yourself slipping into self-hatred, sabotage, depression, stop and ask, what part of me is trying to die so that I can finally live? And in that question, Freud would say, begins the real work.